What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So this is a series I want to try, and it's something I want to do moving forward. I basically want to have a project going most times where I'm kind of modeling out a building in detail just to kind of grow my modeling skills and figure out different things that work in my workflow and things like that. So I figured I'd break this up into maybe like 30-minute modeling segments or something like that, and then I'd kind of speed them up a little bit, so maybe each video is like 10 minutes long. Let me know below what you think about the format, but I thought I'd kind of walk you through what I was doing as kind of like a here's how I'm modeling things currently, how to kind of format. So I'm just going to walk you through what I'm doing as I do this, and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about this. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have or to change the format depending on what's going to be helpful for you. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. So one thing for me that I'm finding really helpful is I use the extension Placemaker, and specifically the NEARMAP data that's contained inside of this in order to set up my maps. As most of you know, when I import a location inside of SketchUp, you don't necessarily get the most detailed imagery, so a lot of the time I'll use the Placemaker NEARMAP data in order to get a higher resolution image. So there is a cost associated with that. You could also probably bring in an image from like Google Maps or something like that. Don't ask me about the licensing having to do with that, because I don't necessarily know what the deal is with that, but you could use that as an alternative if you needed a higher resolution image. And so what I'm doing here is I imported the NEARMAP data, which is a high resolution image, and now I'm using photos. Well, I use the NEARMAP data in order to kind of block out the shape of the building, and now what I'm doing is I'm using photos from Google Street View to place these. So I'm placing these photos on the face using the texturing tools inside of SketchUp. So if you bring this in, for example, you can see how what I'm doing is I kind of drew a box that was about the size that I thought the building was going to be. And now what I'm doing is I'm bringing these images in and I'm positioning them on the faces. And if you have questions about this, I can do another tutorial on this in the future. But basically what I'm doing is I'm just using photos to kind of rough out the way that this might look. So what I've done is I've created these boxes and extruded them up. And then if you right click on it, or if you import these images as a texture, you can use you can use the fix pins mode, and you can basically place them on a point in the texture, and you can use that. You can click and drag those fixed pins in order to place this on the actual face that you're trying to place this on. So you can see how what I'm doing is I'm basically using the proportions of this image in order to kind of place these on here, and then I'm using that to adjust the height of my building. So for example, I've got this little outcropping here. Well, what I've done is I've placed this texture on that building, and I've kind of used the way that the roof sits on the face next to it to kind of place this in here and figure out the proportion of this lower face to the upper face. And so you can see how from here, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of extruding the faces up that I've created, and I'm just going to keep bringing images in and placing them on these faces. And I'm just kind of making these fine adjustments until the building kind of looks the way that I want it to look. So you can see how I'm drawing lines across these edges, and I'm just push-pulling things up and down in order to kind of match the way that this building looks with the actual photos that I've taken. So for example, you can see how what I'm doing right here is this building has a parapet that you can see from the image, from the NEARMAP image that I brought in. And so I'm just roughing out where those parapets would be on the roof, because then I can kind of block off this area, and then I can pull things up and down to match the way that the actual building looks. So it's just a bunch of fine adjustment. You can see how I'm switching to X-ray mode and then back again using the styles toolbar. So that allows me to see through this so that I can kind of see that image on the ground and then use it to draw things on the roof as well. And so as I do this, you can see how what I'm doing is once I've figured out kind of the outline of that parapet, I'm just coming in and I'm just drawing like a 6-inch wide parapet in here, and then I can pull the rest of this roof down. So you can see how now I've got that general shape of this building. And this is usually how I try to start, if I'm modeling from a photo, I try to start by figuring out the different shapes that the building's made up of, right? So for example, this particular building, it's a whole bunch of different rectangles. So I try to go in and I first block out those faces using the map data, and then I come in and I kind of fine tune them after the fact. And so you can see how I'm just going to go through and I'm just going to do the exact same thing on every one of these faces. So when you use the fix pins, what you can do is you can single click on those pins and you can put them on a certain point, and then you can click and drag in order to place this texture on that face. And if you guys remind me, I will try to put a link to a tutorial on that in the notes down below. I actually use this a lot when I'm modeling from different photos, because at the end of the day, it's kind of a weird thing where when we look at a building, so I always try to model from photos, because otherwise you kind of miss out on those fine details in here. So that's why I'm placing photos on each one of these, so that I can kind of use that as a reminder of the different fine details, like the canopies and like the different lights and things like that. If I place this image on this face and then model everything out, it's a lot harder to forget, because the way our brains work is kind of weird in the sense that, like, when we look at a building, we look at the building, we remember things like doors and windows and maybe even the material that the building is made up of, but the smaller details like the little lights and the little recesses where the stucco is on the building and other things like that, we don't necessarily remember. So using a photo like this is a great way to remind us that, like, for example, there's a sign on the top of this building that says drive-through, or there's a little stucco piece on here that has a little recess on it. So those are the things that kind of make these buildings look more realistic. And I will say that depending on what you're trying to do, you don't always want to do this. So my intention with this building is to model it out in detail. I'm really trying to grow my attention to detail when I'm modeling, and so that's part of the reason that I'm doing this. Now, if you're just trying to create like a quick context model or something like that that's going to go in the background, you don't necessarily need to pay quite as much attention to this. But if you are trying to render or model something for rendering or something like that, using tools like this and strategies like this can really help you remember those details, and those are going to be the things that are going to be really important that make the difference between a realistic render and a not realistic render. And so one thing I'm doing here, because I'm going to start breaking these faces up and creating glass and other things like that, is I've created a copy of the building. That way I have a reference when I start removing textures on this face. I'm going to have that off to the left so that I can look at it. But what I'm doing here is I'm using an extension called Placemaker in order to create this glass. And so Placemaker, I believe, is an extension from TIG, and I will link to that in the notes down below. But basically what you do with Placemaker is you select a face, and then it'll automatically offset that face and push pull it. So it's really good for creating things like commercial level glass and things like that, like storefront systems. So when you run it, what it's going to do is it's going to let you set the lattice material as well as the pane material, and you can see how this created that storefront glass really quickly. So I'm a huge fan of this particular extension. And so the other thing, so I'm a huge fan of this particular extension for creating that commercial glass. And so one thing I'm trying to do as I go is I'm really trying to pay attention to the little detail items that are on this building. For example, this is a little light fixture location, and so I wanted to go ahead and model that out so that I had a little 3D piece sticking out from here. So like I said, I'm really trying to model out all of the different detail things and to start remembering those things when I create them in models. Because if you don't remember to create those, then a lot of the time when you render out your buildings, you just don't have that level of detail that your brain kind of unconsciously expects. So the other thing I'm doing is I'm extruding these faces out a little bit, because you're going to have a little lip on this roof. And so what I'm doing is I'm selecting all of these faces and I'm using the extension joint push pull in order to push this outward just a bit. So when I push pull this outward just a bit, this means my wall isn't really just uniform straight up and down anymore. So this is kind of a test video for a series that I want to do, so leave a comment below and let me know what you think about the format, if it's too fast for you, if you're finding it helpful. I just love having that conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. If you like what I'm doing in this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Every little bit helps, even if it's only $1 a month. So make sure you check out that link in the notes down below. But in any case, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.